Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Ashley, and I cannot wait to share today's topic with you. If you have a period, or if you know someone who has a period, this episode is for you. I'm having Corinne come back on the show. So she was on episode number 7, and we'll include that in the show notes if you want to learn more about her misdiagnosis and how this sent her on a quest to really advocate for people who have PCOS and have issues with their cycle. I highly recommend listening to that. But Corinne comes on the show and she talks to us about our cycles. And I'm not kidding y'all. My eyes, I was like wide-eyed, my mouth was open, just listening to Corinne speak on a subject that a lot of us don't hear a lot about. So to give you a background on Corinne, she's a former high school teacher turned certified holistic nutritionist. She's a podcaster and she's a speaker, and she empowers people to address the root cause of their symptoms, to honor their cyclical nature, and heal naturally to find inner peace and overall well-being. Corinne teaches people how they can have more energy, better moods, a pain-free, regular period, boosted fertility, thrive with PCOS, and overall improve their quality of life by aligning to their cycle. Corinne's passion for wellness came out of her own health struggles, which is shared in episode 7, of an irregular, non-existent period, migraines, body rashes, facial hair growth, IBS, all of which stemmed from undiagnosed PCOS. So now it's her mission to help as many people as possible feel their absolute best with proven strategies so they can fully show up in their life. How powerful is that? So join me in welcoming this incredible conversation all about periods, all about your menstrual cycle. So please join me in welcoming Corinne to the show. Welcome back to the podcast, Corinne.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. I can't wait to dive into this. It'll be so fun.
Ooh, I'm so excited. I just feel like this is a subject that we need to talk about more. So I'm so thankful that you agreed to come back on and just share your wisdom with me and the audience.
Of course. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So let's dive right in. And I really just kind of want to ask a basic question to kickstart us off. And what is what is a period, and why the heck do people with periods have them?
Yes. Okay. This is such a good question because a lot of us, a lot of times we think that our period is just like when we're bleeding. It's like, okay, like I got my period, I'm bleeding, and like, that's it. I mean, that's what I thought for the majority of my life, but that's not really what we need to be looking for. The main thing that we need to be looking for a natural period is ovulation, because a period is not an actual period unless you go through all 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, specifically that you ovulated. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, we do have 4 phases to our cycle, which most of us don't know about because again, we weren't taught this information. At least I wasn't.
Nope.
So yeah. And the reason why we have phases is because our hormones fluctuate throughout the month. So in order to have a true period, we need to go through those phases, specifically ovulation. And the reason why ovulation is so important and why getting a true menstrual phase and having a period is so important is because ovulation produces one of our major sex hormones called progesterone. And progesterone, like I said, is a sex hormone that is needed to hold on to and nourish a pregnancy, but it's also needed because if you're like, Corinne, I don't want to get pregnant right now, totally fine, me neither. It's still really, really important to make sure that we are producing progesterone because it also helps support your bones, your thyroid, your metabolism. It helps relax your nervous system. It helps you sleep. It helps prevent osteoporosis later in life and heart disease and endometrial cancer. So it's a really, really, really important hormone. And if you're on hormonal birth control, you have the synthetic form of this called progestin, but it's not the same. It doesn't act the same in your body. So it's really important. That's the reason why we need a period. That's the reason why people need to be ovulating, whether they want to get pregnant or not. Because for years and years, I didn't have a period and I didn't think it was a big deal because I was young. I wasn't trying to get pregnant. So I was like, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care right now. But it does matter because I wasn't ovulating, which means I wasn't producing that hormone, and negatively impacts your overall health, not just your reproductive health, when you are not ovulating.
Okay. So when you're not ovulating or when you don't have a period, so basically what you're saying is like I would safe to assume that we do need a period every month. Like it is important.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you need to be ovulating every single month. It's very, very, very important. And some people could bleed and think that that's an actual period, but unless you're truly tracking your ovulation, you don't know if you're ovulating. So you could bleed at the end of the month and not have actually ovulated. Because what can happen is you could build up enough estrogen where your uterine lining is built up and then it needs to shed without the act of ovulation actually happening. So in order to really know that you're having a true period and you're truly ovulating, you need to be tracking that. So, but yes, for sure, it is super, super important for your overall health to make sure that you're ovulating every single month and you're getting a regular menstrual cycle.
Okay. And part of that reasoning is because of the hormones, which are really important for, like you said, a host of different health
Yes.
reasons. Okay.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
exactly.
Can
Yeah.
y'all see why I had Corinne back on the podcast? Because this is stuff that we're not taught. Like I just thought, okay, yeah, like a period's important, and so many birth controls out there, like either I don't know how this works, but cuts off your period, or you don't have a period. So obviously, bleeding is
Yes.
important every month, but also you're saying ovulation is important every month. How do you know if you're ovulating?
Yes, amazing, amazing question. So, if you're on hormonal birth control, specifically the pill, the NuvaRing, the shot, the implant, you are not ovulating. So, let me just start with that because that's another thing that I never knew. When I learned that, I was like, holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I thought people told you that it helps, quote unquote, regulate your period, but it's actually not doing that. It's turning off your ovulation. So, the communication from your ovaries to your brain is no longer happening. So essentially, you're not actually getting a real period. It's just a withdrawal bleed from the medication. So it's really important to note that because a lot of people think that it's actually helping you regulate your period, but it's not actually doing that. So if you are on hormonal birth control, when I'm talking about right now how to track your ovulation and you're on those specific forms, you won't be able to because you're not actually ovulating. So, for those of you who are not on hormonal birth control, the way to track ovulation properly is by tracking your basal body temperature and your cervical mucus. You could also track your like positioning of your cervix, but that's really complicated. So we're not going to get into that today. So
Okay.
we're just going to focus on the two biomarkers that are easier to track, which is your cervical mucus and your basal body temperature. And the reason why we use that to track instead of just an app or ovulation strips, because a lot of people that I work with, if they are trying to get pregnant and track ovulation, they're using LH strips or ovulation strips and an app. And you can use that in conjunction with the biomarkers, but I do not recommend doing that alone because it's not actually telling you that you ovulated. The ovulation strips that people use are just letting you know when your LH or luteinizing hormone level increases, and that increases leading up to ovulation, but you might not ovulate after that. So it doesn't actually tell you that you definitely did ovulate. So it's really important to make sure that you're tracking other biomarkers with it. So the biomarkers that I'm talking about will start with the basal body temperature, and that is your waking temperature. And the reason why we track this, and I'll walk you through it. I also have a whole podcast episode on this that I could have you link below because
Yes, definitely.
people need to hear this multiple times. So if you're
Yes.
listening to this and you're confused, like don't worry, you could re-listen to it a million times because it is a little confusing in the beginning, but I'll just give you the basics of why it's really important too and how you can start doing it. So like I said before, ovulation creates the hormone progesterone, and progesterone increases our metabolism, and which in fact also increases our metabolic rate, which increases our temperature. So your body temperature increases after you ovulated. So when you track your basal body temperature, which is your waking temperature, by taking it every single morning before you get out of bed, you roll over, you literally take your temperature. You could buy a basal body temperature on Amazon. You can get a natural cycles one, a temp drop. There's a ton of different types that you can get, but you could also just get on Amazon if you just want to like try it out. You take it every single morning, and before you ovulate, your waking temperature will be about 97 to 97.7 degrees, and it'll range every day, but it'll be within that range. And then after ovulation, it will increase about 0.5 degrees to about 98 to 98.8 degrees. So it's not a huge increase. It's only about 0.5 degrees increase, but that increase is letting you know that you produced the hormone progesterone, which means that you ovulated. Now, the tricky part is you have to make sure that that higher temperature, that 98 to 98.8 degree range, stays at higher temperature for at least 3 days in a row to confirm confirm ovulation, because sometimes you randomly will just get a spike up and then it'll go right back down the next day. And that's not confirming ovulation. It has to be 3 days in a row. And ideally it will stay that higher temperature until you get your period. Unless you get pregnant, then it'll just continue to stay high. But that will let you know you have good progesterone levels if it does stay that higher temperature till you get your period. But you have to at least show that it is high for 3 consecutive days to confirm ovulation.
Hmm.
I know
Fascinating.
it's a little, I know that's a lot.
It
I know it's
is.
a lot.
So I know like people who want to get pregnant, like I've heard of people just checking their basal body temperature so that they can try and conceive, I'm assuming during when your temperature is higher. Is that right?
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought this up. So if you are trying to conceive, this is where the cervical mucus piece comes in, because once you see that your temperature increased, ovulation already happened, which means like you're not fertile anymore, right? So we also were told that we can get pregnant at any time, but you can't. You could actually only get pregnant up to 6 days max out of the month. So the act of ovulation is just a 24-hour situation. So once you see that temperature increase, I would say if you are trying to avoid pregnancy, still wait a good 24 hours after that, just to make sure that like shop is closed. But if you are trying to actively get pregnant, you want to make sure that you have sex before ovulation, which is where your cervical mucus patterns come in. So whenever you see, and the reason why this is, I'll explain in a second, but the reason why we track our cervical mucus is because leading up to ovulation, our estrogen in our follicular phase, the follicular phase is the phase right before you ovulate. This is when your estrogen levels are starting to rise to prepare for ovulation. So the follicle can burst, the egg can release, and you can ovulate. So our estrogen levels are rising to prepare for this. And because our estrogen levels are rising, it causes our cervical mucus production to increase, because sperm cannot stay alive or get to the egg without cervical mucus present. So cervical mucus is what allows the sperm to stay alive, and it can actually stay alive in the cervical mucus for up to 5 days, which is why you could be fertile 5 to 6 days out of the month. So say that you ovulate on Friday, right? Say you're going to ovulate on a Friday and you have sex on that Monday before, Tuesday before, Wednesday before, whatever. You can still get pregnant even if you have sex on that Tuesday, because the sperm that was released inside of you can stay in that cervical mucus, and it's held at the base of our cervix for up to 5 days. So then when you ovulate, the sperm and everything is still right there and it's ready to go. So this is why we track our cervical mucus production. So technically, anytime you really see cervical mucus, it's either go time if you're trying to get pregnant. Again, if this is cervical mucus in your follicular phase, which is the phase after your period and before ovulation, which is why tracking ovulation is important, because the menstrual phase and the ovulation phase are like our anchors. So we know when the other phases actually are. So it's either go time if you want to get pregnant when you see that cervical mucus, or if you don't want to get pregnant and you're not on hormonal birth control, you want to wrap it up, you want to avoid, like do whatever you got to do to make sure that you don't want to get pregnant in that time. But there will be different types of cervical mucus patterns. So leading up to ovulation in your follicular phase, right after your period, you'll notice it'll be pretty dry. Like you might have a little bit of something going on down there, but they'll be pretty dry, which is totally normal. But then you'll notice you might get some like lotiony, creamy material, or not material, consistency of cervical mucus. Maybe in your underwear, you'll see a little bit. It's nothing crazy. But then the closer you get to ovulation, when you're most fertile, when you can get pregnant, you'll notice it's more like a raw egg white consistency. It's really stretchy. When you wipe, it's a little bit slippery. Like you might be sitting there, you're like, oh, did I just get my period? Like it feels like something just fell out. Like what's going on? Like it's all of a sudden wet. That is your peak cervical mucus, means you're getting closer to ovulation, which means you're even more fertile. Like this is where it's like, let's go, let's try and get pregnant, or let's avoid pregnancy.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. And for those of you listening, I know you can't see my face, but literally my eyes are so wide. My mouth is like open listening to Corinne.
Oh my God.
Okay.
But yeah, if you're overwhelmed, just know that like here, there's a bunch of times. I know it's a lot all at once. So if you're confused, just go back, re-listen to it, and I'll give the episode to Ashley so she can put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So Corinne, you've mentioned the 4 phases of our cycle a little bit, but can we kind of go through those maybe in more detail and maybe just explain what a cycle is?
Yes. Amazing. Okay. So our menstrual cycle is the whole kit and caboodle from the day you actually start bleeding until the day before you bleed again, right? So it's not just our period, it is the whole cycle, the whole 4 phases. So let's start from day one. The day you start bleeding is the day you start counting your cycle as day one. So it's the day you start fully bleeding, right? Sometimes people will spot a little bit beforehand. They'll notice some brown spotting or some random pink spotting. Like that can either be a sign of low progesterone levels. It could also just be leftover blood from the cycle before. So if you're tracking your period, you want to count day one as the day where you're like bleeding. You're like, okay, I need to put a cup in, a tampon, a disc, a pad, whatever you use. Okay. So that's day one of your cycle. And your menstrual phase, the time that you're bleeding, a normal cycle, again, the menstrual phase portion of it could be anywhere from about 3 to 7 days. If it's anything more than 7 days, it's abnormal and you probably have some excess estrogen levels. And if it's anything less than 3 days, that's also abnormal. You might have some low estrogen levels happening. So anywhere between the 3 to 7 day phase, it should not be painful. It should not be overly heavy. It shouldn't have any clots in it. All of these things are signs of imbalances. So it's really important to note that, because we have been told that a painful period is totally normal and all this crap that it's not, which I know you have experience with that as well.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So that's your menstrual phase. And this is when your hormones are at their lowest level. So the reason why we have phases is because our hormone levels are not always the same throughout the month, which is why you won't feel the same every month. Your appetite will change, your metabolism changes, your cortisol levels change, your energy levels change. Everything changes throughout the month because your hormone levels change. So during that menstrual phase, those 3 to 7 days that you're bleeding, your hormone levels are at their absolute lowest, which is why you'll naturally have lower energy. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be totally wiped out and like completely fatigued, like you can't get out of bed. That's again a sign of imbalance. That's not normal, but you generally will have lower energy. So that is your menstrual phase. And once your period ends, we move into your follicular phase. And the follicular phase is the most variable time of our cycle. The length of it is going to depend on every single person, because we don't always ovulate on the same day every single cycle, which is another really important thing to note, because everybody tells you that, oh, everyone has a 28-day cycle, which means that we all ovulate on day 14, which is totally not true. Most people don't ovulate on day 14. Most people don't just have a 28-day cycle. And what that means, a 28-day cycle, is from day one that you start bleeding until the day before you bleed again. That's your whole cycle. So you want that to be for a normal cycle, that should be anywhere between 21 and 35 days long, the whole cycle in general.
Yeah.
So follicular phase, this is, again, the length of time is variable, but it's the phase in between your menstrual cycle and your ovulation cycle. So it can be anywhere from like 10 to 17 days, 10 to 20. It totally depends on when you actually ovulate. But the point of this phase is your hormone levels, your estrogen levels, and your testosterone levels specifically are slowly starting to rise to prepare for ovulation. So since these hormone levels are starting to rise, you'll notice your energy levels are starting to rise. You'll notice that your cervical mucus will again be starting to increase, that you will notice your sex drive will be coming back to life, because again, when your hormone levels are low, your sex drive is low. And this is also really, really normal, especially I think it's important for any women who are listening, or people who, were maybe born female at birth. With your sex drive, it is really important to know that it's not always going to be the same. And the ease of orgasm is also not going to be the same. It's going to completely depend. Yeah, exactly. It's going to depend on where you're at in your cycle. If your testosterone levels are low, you're not going to feel in the mood. If your estrogen levels are low, you're not going to have as much cervical mucus production. Certain phases, we have more ease of orgasm, like during our ovulation phase. So know that you're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with your relationship. Like that just happens. So I just wanted to note that really quick.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Like and I want to talk about appetite when we kind of go through these phases, but I think it's important to know that like your 28 days or your cycle isn't going to be like perfect. Like orgasming isn't the exact same, or your sex drive isn't the exact same. Your appetite isn't the exact same. Your mood, your energy levels aren't the same, which I think is really important to highlight, because sometimes we feel like we, quote, should be robotic.
Exactly. And this is why so much information that we're given about, diet culture and working out and all this crap, all these studies are done on men and postmenopausal women, and they're not done on reproductive age women, and they're not done taking our cycle into consideration. So that's a whole nother topic. But okay, so follicular phase, your hormone levels are rising. And if we're thinking about it like seasons, which is what I help my clients with, it kind of makes it a little bit more easy to like identify. The menstrual phase is like winter, right? You kind of want to go inward. Everything's like low, it's cold, no hormone levels are low. Follicular phase is like spring. Things are starting to sprout up now. Your energy is increasing. It's like things are starting to happen. Then you move into your ovulation phase, which the actual act of ovulation, like we talked about, is only about 24 hours, but the phase, like the energy of it, the fertility of it is about, like 5 to 7 days of a phase long. Okay. So again, you will notice that you are in your ovulation phase when you start seeing that raw egg white consistency. You start noticing that your energy is higher. You start noticing that your motivation is higher. Your sex drive is higher. All of these things start increasing because your estrogen and your testosterone levels are at their absolute highest during ovulation, because your body is really smart and it knows that you can get pregnant. And our body is always trying to get us pregnant, whether we want to or not, because it's just how our body is designed. So that is why it is giving you those feels. So this is like summer, right? Everything is peaking. We're all excited. Like everyone wants to be outward. You want to be more social. Like that is what the ovulation phase is all about. And again, that's about 3 to 5 days long. And you'll know when your ovulation phase ends if you are tracking your basal body temperature. And again, you see that temperature increase and you see that it's high for at least 3 days in a row. You know that you confirmed ovulation, progesterone was produced, and now we're in our luteal phase. And this is when things are really changing, because now we have progesterone on the scene. Whereas in the follicular phase and like right before you ovulate, you don't have that progesterone level created yet. So you don't have that estrogen to progesterone ratio, because estrogen and progesterone are like yin and yang. They like counterbalance each other. So in your luteal phase, this is where things really start to shift, because now you have estrogen present and you also have progesterone. So this is where your appetite again is going to increase because your metabolism increases because of that progesterone level. Your energy in the beginning of the luteal phase is like fall, because your hormone levels are slowly going to be decreasing as we get to the menstrual phase. And this is about 10 to 14 days long. So it's about the 10 to 14 days before your period. This is where if you do have a hormonal imbalance, you could experience PMS, you could experience breast tenderness, mood swings, acne, like all those things that we have deemed normal for getting a period, which are not normal. But this is the phase that can happen in, because if we have a disproportionate amount of estrogen to progesterone, we're going to experience those imbalances. That's all those imbalances are: the PMS, the breast tenderness, the painful periods, whatever it is, the moodiness. That is just the direct result of having a disproportionate amount of estrogen to progesterone. So you maybe don't have enough progesterone to your estrogen levels. I can get into all of that too. But the point of this phase is that your cortisol, your resting cortisol levels are also higher, which is why doing really high intense workouts are not going to support you during this phase. Your metabolism is quicker. Your blood sugar is more dysregulated. So you are going to notice that as you get closer to your period, about the 5 to 7 days towards your period, your hormones really start declining. So you're going to notice the need to want to go inward a little bit more. You're going to notice your energy starts dipping a little bit more. Again, your sex drive is dipping a little bit more. And then we go right back into the menstrual phase.
Huh. It's so interesting that you said that about even just like working out, because I'll notice, Corinne, and I'm sure other listeners can agree with me, like there are kind of weeks just throughout the month where I don't really want to go super hard in the gym. I kind of want to just take it easier, or just my desire to like have a really intense, hard workout isn't there. And so I'm curious now, I kind of want to pay attention to when that actually happens to see if it's related to my cycle.
Yes, I bet you it is, because it's so cool when you identify that. Like in your follicular and ovulatory phases, that's probably when you're like, yes, let's go. Like you have that energy and your body is like, let's get going. And then in that luteal and menstrual phase, you're going to want to probably slow down a little bit, because that's what's best for your body. And your body's always giving you those clues.
Yeah. And I think too, I like that you highlighted even just our appetite, because I'll hear clients, and I'm sure you do the same. It's like, well, I'm not super hungry today, but then maybe the next day they're maybe a bit more ravenous, or like, for a couple of days they're hungrier than normal. And they're like, is something wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? And it sounds like this could potentially be related to your cycle.
Yes, absolutely. Like, of course, it definitely can be related to your cycle. It also, as you know, could be related to how well you slept, your exercise that day, what you're actually eating, all of that, right? So there's some factors. But if we're talking cycle wise, like I said, in that luteal phase, phase, the 10 to 14 days before your period, your metabolism is faster. So you naturally burn about like 250 more calories than usual just from being in that phase without even doing anything extra. And I'm not someone who counts calories or anything like that, but it's just really good to know that that's naturally happening, which is why you are more hungry. So in the follicular and ovulatory phase, you might wake up and not feel that hungry. You could go a little bit longer without food. You might be more satiated with a salad and like stuff on it, and like feel like a smoothie will hold you over. In your luteal phase, you might notice that you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I'm ravenous. Like I need an extra snack between lunch and dinner. A salad is not cutting it for me. A smoothie is not cutting it for me. We naturally need denser foods in that time to support where our hormone levels are at. So it's so important to know that, because sometimes we think there's something wrong with us. It's like, wait, I just had a smoothie for breakfast like a week ago and I was totally fine. And now I'm freaking starving. Or I just crushed this workout a week ago and now I'm trying to do the same one again. And I'm like, I can't even get through it. It's because
Yes.
of where your hormone levels are at.
Yeah. Oh, that's so incredible. Okay. So just to repeat the 4 phases, starts with menstrual, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I already second guessing
Yes.
myself.
Yep.
And then
No,
follicular.
you got it. Yep.
Okay. And tell me the last 2.
Okay. Then ovulation and then luteal.
Okay. All right. And I like how you paired them with the seasons. I think that that helps at least me kind of understand more of what's going on.
Yeah.
I remember you talking about that months ago, and that has still stuck with me, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay. So how can we lean into these phases? I know you talk about, even from like a work standpoint, of like leaning into these phases
Mhm.
to make decisions or do different things. Do you want to just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, totally. So again, because our hormones affect everything, our hormones are chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to organs, tissues, so like everywhere. Everywhere there's blood, a hormone is flowing. So it affects everything, not just our reproductive system. So it does affect our brain. Our brain actually changes up to 25% throughout the month, which is crazy when you think about it, where men's don't do that, right? Like they don't have those fluctuating hormones. Their hormones fluctuate from morning to night, and that's it. It's the same every single day. Ours do change morning to night, but they also change cyclically throughout the weeks, throughout the months. So because our brain is changing, our desires and our motivation is also going to change. So for example, in your menstrual phase, we'll just start there. Where our hormone levels are at, it causes our left and right hemisphere of our brains to be able to communicate more effectively because the hormones are so low. So this causes you to be way more intuitive, and it also allows you to have that other side of your brain, the analytical side of your brain, be able to take action on the intuition that you're getting. So this is a really good time to go inward. Like if you're a journaler or someone who even processes maybe going for a walk without any music or something like that, like it's a really, really amazing time to listen to your intuition. And we have been conditioned to think that, oh, you must have your period because you're like acting crazy or whatever. Like, and yes, that is a reality if your hormones are imbalanced, but it's also really important to know to trust yourself during menstrual phase, because you have like a portal is like opened where you have those intuitive hits. Trust whatever is actually coming up. So this is a really good time in your career, in your relationship, in your business, to really journal out like how you're actually feeling. What is not feeling good in whatever area of your life? What feels off? What feels like it's out of alignment? And how can you start moving towards a direction that's actually going to support you? So that's a really good place to be in your menstrual phase. And a lot of times we don't take the time to slow down enough and to rest enough to even hear it. So, and
Oh,
obviously everybody has different circumstances. Maybe you have children, maybe you're working 3 jobs, like whatever it is, you might not have like a whole day to just sit and do nothing, but whatever amount of time that you can take, whether it's 15 minutes, an hour, like whatever amount of time you can take, really give it to yourself to be alone and to tap in and listen to what's coming up for you, because it's so important and it is going to help you move the needle forward, especially if you're a business owner. It's hard sometimes to take this time and think like, oh, I'm not being quote unquote productive, but you are. So highly recommend doing that. And then moving into your follicular phase, when your hormone levels are starting to rise, this is when your brain is primed for newness. It wants to try new things. You're really creative. You're really good at brainstorming, thinking of new ideas, planning. So this is a perfect time for you to brainstorm new ideas in your business, in your career, with just whatever is going on in your life. This is a great time to create things, like allow your creativity to really go wild in this phase without attaching to the how it's actually going to happen, because that will just like smash your creativity. So just like write it all down. Like I always tell my clients, have a notebook specifically for your follicular phase where you just write down all these ideas as you just come back to it, because you have so many ideas during this phase and you really like planning. So this is when you could look at your entire month and plan things accordingly, and allow like schedule things based on your cycle phases, which I'll tell you as we go along. But this is a really good time to do that, to look ahead, to plan when you want to go out with friends, to plan when you want to do this, that, whatever. Like really look at your schedule during this phase. We like to really learn and try new things. So go for a different walk than usual, try a new workout class, go to a new restaurant. Like this is what we actually like to do during this phase. And if you are a business owner, brainstorming, creating, that's a perfect phase for doing that, like creating graphics, things like that. It just comes so much more easily. Yes, you could do anything at any time, but that doesn't mean that you should. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't lean into what our brain is actually primed for doing, because it makes you so much more efficient and so much more productive because your brain is wired to do those things during those phases. So that's the follicular phase. Then the ovulation phase is when you are really social, like you really want to be outward. This is a great time to do podcast interviews. I'm currently ovulating right now. Your communication centers of your brain are firing off. So you are more easily able to communicate what you want to get across. This is a really good time to have tough conversations, to go out with friends, to go on podcasts, to network, to, to launch. If you are a business owner, this is a great time for you to launch whatever it is that you want to launch, because your estrogen levels are really high, which makes your mood really high. You're in a better mood naturally. You're naturally more magnetic because if you think about it, the egg is attracting the sperm. So the egg sends out a signal that drives the sperm crazy and the sperm comes to the egg. So that's what's going on internally, which means outwardly you are more magnetic. So really tap into that. If you're single, like this is a time to go out on dates. There have been studies that shown that people when they're ovulating actually look more attractive during their ovulation phase. Like it's so crazy.
Yeah.
So this is the time to be outward.
Okay. All right. I love it.
And you'll feel it. Like you'll feel the need to do this once you tap into it, versus in your luteal phase, this is when you're going to start tending to go more inward, right? So your luteal and your menstrual phase are where you want to be more inward. Your follicular and your ovulation phase are where you tend to be more outward. So, and it's really cool that we have this like built-in system that allows us to do both and allows us to not burn out. Because if we were always in this outward phase and we never return back to ourselves, we will burn out. So the luteal phase is when you really like to do a lot of like admin tasks and more of organizing. So like organizing the files on your computer, organizing drawers in your house. Like this is when I clean out my closet. I deep clean the whole house. I'm organizing things. Like you'll notice you'll just be in the mood to do those things. This is when you like don't want to procrastinate. So you tie up any loose ends, any like new projects you maybe start in your follicular phase. This is when you tie them up. So if you have Amazon returns you have not done and they're just sitting in the corner, get them done. Get your oil change, like do the stuff that you've been putting off. This is the phase you want to get shit done, and do those tasks that aren't so much forward facing, because you don't really want to be outward. So it's the time to do more of the back end stuff of whatever, your business, your career, whatever it is that you're doing. And you want to be more inward. So you're going to notice that especially the closer you get to your period, you're going to want some space from people. You're not going to really want to be going out and doing a ton of things. So keep that in mind when you are planning stuff in your follicular phase. You have obviously, sometimes we have events we keep that up, but if you're planning things with friends, whatever, try and plan it in your follicular ovulatory phases, because you are going to want more of that space to yourself and to go inward during that luteal phase and menstrual phase.
I feel like in a way, this is like giving ourselves permission to tap into how we're feeling. Cause I talk about so much like, with food, paying attention to how food makes you feel, but also this is so important of like, maybe when I don't feel like going out, well, why might that be? Do I need space, or is it related to my phase, or I'm feeling really energetic and, want to hang out with a bunch of people. It's like, well, could it be related to my phase? Like, I just think it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah. And the more that you know about it and the more that you lean into it, the more that you're like, yep, this is exactly what I want. And even with food, you'll know that's a whole nother topic, but you'll know, like you'll gravitate towards certain things and different phases. And it's just so cool to like acknowledge that we have this going on, acknowledge we have these fluctuating hormones that are changing things. And the more that we tap into it, and it takes time, right? Like, especially because we've been living our lives for so long in such a linear way with completely ignoring our cycle because we've never learned about it. But the more that you learn about it, the more that you realize like it's a blueprint that you have that is guiding you throughout the month. And it's just so freeing when you allow your body to work for you instead of constantly fighting against it like we've been conditioned to do.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Corinne, I cannot let you go without asking you because you said earlier on about painful periods, how that really isn't, quote, normal. So can you just touch on that a little bit more? Because I feel like I've always
Yes.
been told, well, it's normal to have cramps and to sit with a heating pad and take a bunch of Midol or ibuprofen and lay on the
Yeah.
couch. So
Yes. Oh my God. Haven't we all? And I've been there. I used to literally have packs of Midol during my period. Like that's what my life was. But it's not normal. And pain is never normal. Like we should just know that. Like any type of pain is really not normal. That means there's something going on. And our period, our menstrual cycle, the whole thing is our vital sign, which means it's letting us know of inner health that's going on, the quality of our health. So a vital sign means like the other four vital signs are your blood pressure, your body temperature, your breathing rate, and your heart rate. Those are the other four vital signs. And the fifth vital sign is your menstrual cycle. So if you're having pain during your period, that's your body's way of letting you know that there is a deeper issue. There's a root cause that is causing this pain to happen. And a lot of times it can be caused from inflammation that causes high estrogen levels. And it also causes something called prostaglandins. These are like hormone-like substances in our bodies. And there are three different types of prostaglandins. Two of them are anti-inflammatory. One of them is inflammatory. But when we have inflammation in our body from, maybe an inflammatory diet, obviously dairy causes inflammation, gluten can cause inflammation, stress can cause inflammation, medication, environment, toxins, pesticides, like we can go on and on and on about things that cause inflammation. This can cause these inflammatory prostaglandins to be increased, which is going to cause these painful periods. So it is a direct result of having too much inflammation in our body. So it sounds simple, but when you get up, when you do things that are anti-inflammatory, it's going to increase the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. It's going to reduce that amount of excess estrogen, and it's going to allow your period to not be painful. Now, obviously, this could also be a sign of endometriosis. So you definitely want to make sure that this is also why I talk all about painful periods, because women who have, or people who get diagnosed with endometriosis sometimes go decades and decades, literally, without being diagnosed because they just think that a painful period is normal because that's what they're told, or they go on the birth control pill for it, or the IUD, like whatever it is. But it's not normal. So if you do have painful periods, I highly suggest getting some blood work done, working with somebody, getting some ultrasounds, like really making sure that you are ruling out endometriosis. Or if you do have endometriosis, you are working with someone who is not just going to throw you on medication for it, is going to actually talk to you about how to switch your diet accordingly. And this is a perfect podcast to talk about this. Whenever I work with clients who have a painful period, I recommend a plant-based diet because a plant-based diet is so anti-inflammatory and it works wonders. Like I've literally worked with clients where they could not get out of bed, like had to take really intense medications, like not just ibuprofen, like narcotics. They couldn't get out of bed because of the pain, and a plant-based diet has helped them. They could do yoga on their period now. Like, it's really, really important. Obviously doing other things as well, like supplements and stuff like that. But plant-based diet is huge. So if you do have painful periods, I do highly recommend increasing the amount of plants that you are consuming, reducing your animal products as much as possible. And it is going to help your inflammation levels. So I can go on and on and on about this, but if you are experiencing painful periods, the first thing I want you to know is number one, it's not normal. It is common, but it's not normal. And number two, start looking at things that might be inflammatory that you could start switching out. So how much are you eating animal products? How can you reduce that? How can you reduce the amount of chemical exposure or toxic exposure you have in your day? Can you switch from like conventional beauty and household cleaning products to non-toxic ones? Like all these things are going to really, really be beneficial for reducing that inflammation, for reducing the amount of estrogen you have that's causing these painful periods.
And if you need some extra support and guidance, Corinne's your girl. So when she says work with somebody, here you go. It's literally the option is right in front of you. And we'll include all of Corinne's information below, including that podcast that you'll send me. And then just some other tidbits, because I mean, I know, Corinne, you also have a podcast called Mind Your Hormones, which you are constantly just putting out some brilliant information on periods, your cycle, and so many other things, which I think is really, really helpful. So definitely check that out. If this is a topic that you're like, whoa, I can learn so much more, or I'm having painful periods, or my doctor just prescribed me birth control and just sent me on my way, I know Corinne talks about it all. So check her out for sure. Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Absolutely. And so Corinne, if someone is, wanting to connect with you or check out we know they're going to check out your podcast, but they want to check you out on Instagram or even like work with you, where is the best place for them to go for that?
Yes. So depending on when this comes out, by the time this recording, my website is under construction. So if you do want to work with me, I would recommend going to my Instagram at Corinne Angelica. If you don't have Instagram, you can email me, Corinne at CorinneAngelicaWellness.com. I also have a text list you can message me at, but Instagram is the easiest place for right now, since my website is under construction. But yeah, on my podcast too, I talk all about how you could join my text list or contact me and what offers I have coming out. But I would love to support you in your journey. And I always answer all my DMs, all my texts, everything. I am obsessed with connecting with everybody in my community. So I would love to hear from you.
Yes. Corinne, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like my mind was blown. I'm sure you listening. I hope yours is the same way. So yeah, thank you again. And I just appreciate you so much.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me on again. I loved it. And I hope this served your community well.
All right. Thanks.
Until next time, keep thriving.